Welcome to the podcast, Laura. I'm really excited to get to know you today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to do this.
So, I just want to say it up top. I said it before we hit record, but you were one of my first intros into the world of anti-diet and intuitive eating from my favorite undergrad professor, Dr. Lizzie Pope, who is friend of the pod. She's been on twice. Yeah, I remember very clearly sitting in her office expressing interest in like some of the intuitive eating stuff she was teaching in class, and she was like, "Oh, like my friend from the postdoc program, you should follow her on Instagram." And she like pulled it up, and I can picture the like pink donut in your profile, and it was you.
Me, yeah.
Yeah,
Oh, I love Lizzie. Shout out to Lizzie. She's great.
she,
So I'm glad that she was able to introduce you to my work.
yeah, and it's a very so that's full circle for me, but it's also cool. Like I know since I've left UVM, they've fully like overhauled the program and it's fully like anti-diet intuitive eating
Yeah.
aligned, which is just so amazing considering most people I talk to are like, I didn't know about this until I've already been practicing from the weight normative lens
Mhm.
for like
Mhm.
years. And she's
Mhm.
has a whole generation of dietitians that are going to be like, I knew about this from the start.
Yeah. Yeah, Lizzie has done really incredible work there. I'm, yeah, very impressed with everything that she's done.
Yeah, it's awesome. Cool. Well, I love starting with hearing about you and your story. And I just find myself personally, selfishly, and listeners are always really interested in hearing about people's story with their own relationship with food and body as much as you're comfortable getting into.
Yeah, sure. Well, I mean, I'm a millennial, so I grew up, in the thick of it in terms of body shaming and so much like criticism and judgment around bodies and just celebrities being picked apart on the front cover of magazines. So, of course, I internalized a lot of that. And I was a bigger kid as well and was bullied and teased because of my size and you know, fell into restrictive patterns of eating and kind of in and out of that sort of binge restrict cycle a lot throughout my later teens and early 20s. Um, but fortunately came across intuitive eating and health at every size sort of quite early on in my nutrition career. And it really just resonated, it clicked, it made sense. It kind of sort of clicked with my own experience as well. And so I was able to implement that in my life and then implement it in my nutrition practice quite early on. So I feel really grateful to have found it and for it to be, something that I still lean on personally, but also, use and work with my clients and write about on my newsletter as well. So yeah, I think that's the TLDR.
Yeah. What made you want to study nutrition in the first place?
Oh gosh, God, we're going back almost 20 years at this point, which is kind of wild to think about. But I Yeah, I was studying my undergraduate degree. I actually enrolled in a biotechnology program. It's really random. I don't know. It was like a flip of a coin decision, and that's what I went with. And but as part of that degree program, you just in your first year are just taking like basic biology classes. Um, and in one of those classes, we had a conversation, or a lecture rather, around nutrition. And I remember them saying something, I'm not going to repeat it because it's really problematic, and I would never say this to a person now, but they were talking about the role that nutrition has in disease. They were associating it with fatness in a way that I would never kind of frame it now, but there was something that was really interesting to me in their in what they were saying, and kind of I'd never really thought about the role that food and nutrition could play in health at that point. And then I don't know, there were a lot of like popular TV programs and books at the time around nutrition as well. And I sort of at the end of that first year, I changed my major. Uh, so that in the second year, I switched to become a nutrition major. And yeah, I think it was it was fueled probably by some weird stuff around food.
Yeah.
And certainly that got reinforced in the program. Like I'm sure you'll have spoken to other guests about stuff like this, but there was a lot of weighing and measuring food, and you have to learn a lot of anthropometry. So you're measuring bodies and then you're comparing them with each other. So it was a pretty toxic environment. Uh, well, where were we? I've
Just what
lost my
made
train of
you
thought, but
study nutrition? Yeah.
yeah. I think I was really fascinated by the science as well, and yeah, just took it and ran with it, and then went and did a PhD in nutrition dietetics, and more recently a postgraduate diploma, which I don't think is something that you have in the US, but in the UK, it's kind of like a an add-on you can do after a degree. And that was in clinical nutrition and eating disorders to try and get my skills up around particularly eating disorder work.
Wow. Yeah, I asked the question about what made you want to study nutrition because I just was wondering about if there was that connection for you of like, I struggled with this, so let me study it. Which it sounds like maybe a little, but also maybe you were just like genuinely interested in the science that kind of piqued your interest.
Yeah, I think there was definitely an element of that in there in terms of like, oh, maybe I can figure this out for myself. But I don't think it was super conscious, and I am a huge nerd. So like the science aspect of things really spoke to me. And actually in my undergraduate program and in my PhD, there was a lot of sociology as well. So it wasn't just like the basic science of nutrition. It was kind of thinking about, okay, how does this fit in a social and a political context as well, which is what I'm really, really fascinated by. And I think, yeah, having those two strands, both the basic science and biology, but also, how does this fit in a sort of broader context? Because I think so much, and I'm sure we'll get into this, so much of nutrition is decontextualized, and without having, a deeper understanding of that context, I don't think we can really do good things with nutrition. We end up doing really bad things with nutrition, in fact. So, um, yeah.
Yeah. One more question on your story, and then we'll kind of switch into more of the meat of the episode. And
Yeah.
that is, can you tell me about the moment that you learned or happened upon anti-diet, health at every size, intuitive eating? Like, what do you remember about that moment?
I, I think there are sort of two memories that jump that kind of, and I can't parse what happened first, and I think they probably happened quite close together. But I remember being actually at Cornell, being in a group, like a research group meeting, and there had been, I don't know if it was a whole paper or maybe just a discussion as part of a paper that raised the concept of health at every size. And so I can't remember which paper it was or anything like that, but I just remember people in the group, in my research group, kind of scoffing at the idea of health at every size and just dismissing it outright. And then simultaneously, I was reading this book, and I have no idea how I how I found it or how I got to it, but it was called Tales from the Fatosphere. I don't know if it's like an old school fat activism book. And it's talking about I'm, can I check this real quick?
Sure, go for it. Yeah, I've
Just,
never heard of that. Yeah.
is that even the right Tales from the Fatosphere? I think that's what it's called. Lessons from the Fatosphere. Yeah. So it's called Lessons from the Lessons from the Fatosphere. Quit dieting and declare a truce with your body. And it was by Kate Harding and Marianne Kirby. So this is kind of an old book now. It's from 2009. I have no idea how I came across this book or where. But it started to, like it says in the subtitle, like dismantle ideas around body hierarchies and dieting, and introduces concepts around health at every size and fat liberation. And so obviously that sort of stuck. And then, I think that led me to like intuitive eating and health at every size and those books. Yeah, and just built from there.
It's interesting. It sounds like you remember being for it when your classmates were maybe, like you said, scoffing at it. Like you were meeting
Yeah, I
some
wish these were
resistance.
my classmates. These were professors
Oh, professors.
and
Okay.
like, academics. And I think that that reflects kind of the the pervasive attitude still within nutrition that fatness is something that needs disciplining and needs correcting. And that it's not possible for people to be healthy in fat bodies and yeah, putting that down to fatness in and of itself rather than, the attendant socio-political disparities.
Right. So you had this spark of a moment where you somehow happened upon this book, Lessons from the Fatosphere, or and a research paper in class.
Mm.
What happens from there to the point where you're like full on a major figure in this field? You write a book called really about one of the early books about how to implement this stuff and how to not diet and think about food in an entirely different way. Like, how does it snowball into such a deep part of
Mm.
you and your career?
Well, after I finished my postdoc, I moved back to the UK, and there was like a huge contrast in what I was seeing in the US, and partly that was because I was in like this academic bubble. And then I came back to the UK, and there was a big sort of wellness culture sort of bubbling up around that time. So we're talking about 2014, 15. And it was all like green juices and, detoxes and cleanses and all of this stuff that, is really problematic and was not based on a shred of evidence. And so I started writing about that on Instagram. I was writing blogs for like the Huffington Post and stuff like that. And then I was like, I need to go deeper. Um, and I started a podcast, Don't Salt My Game. That's a throwback. And I started having kind of conversations about some of the concepts around, body positivity was starting to kind of emerge at that point, health at every size, intuitive eating. And it seemed to just really resonate with people. And so I talked about it more and I learned more and I did more training and I became an intuitive eating counselor and um, then wrote a book about it. So yeah, like it just, it's what I was also doing in practice, right? Day in, day out, I was seeing people about their relationships with food. And when I got into sort of clinical practice, I quite quickly, again, sort of in the context of the height of wellness culture, I quite quickly realized like the problems that people were having weren't nutritional problems, right? Like
Yeah,
nobody was having a deficiency. Nobody,
right.
people weren't coming to me with, um, what I would get, like medical nutrition problems.
Yeah,
They were coming to me, and I quite quickly realized that they had a difficult relationship with food.
totally.
And so again, I was applying all of these skills in my clinical practice and then talking about it on the podcast and in on Instagram predominantly at that time. And yeah, it resonated with people. I developed a course and yeah, like I said, wrote a book. So that's kind
Yeah.
of how it all played out.
So true. You said it's like in school to become a dietitian, like we learn about like scurvy and rickets, and it's like
Yeah.
okay, unless in countries like the US and or the UK, it's like those are those aren't issues that thankfully because of the modern food system, which we'll get
Yeah.
into, that people are having. It's so true. Like I always often feel like this work is so much more food therapy than it is like
Mm.
like yeah, like like about nutrients.
Yeah.
Clients are often surprised how little we actually talk about like what they're eating and more like, yeah, more like emotional and like how they're feeling about what they're eating and the guilt and the morality and all those pieces.
Mm. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I love it. I think it's always brave to do this work, but I just imagine at that time you were taking more of a stand. Like now there's all these accounts that talk anti-diet and like big, practice groups and everything and way
Hmm.
more certified intuitive eating counselors and I don't know, I'm just picturing like how much more rebellious and how much more like guts it probably took then when your professors
Yeah.
were like scoffing at it versus like yeah, I had Lizzie who was like this is cool, right? And I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
So I just I love it and like thank you for paving the way. It's really really awesome.
Thanks for that little trip down memory lane.
Yeah, I love it. People are like, "Oh, you want to hear my story? Here's the TLDR." And I'm like, "No, I want to hear your story."
Yeah, yeah, you want to get into it.
Yeah, so there's so much that we could talk about, and I decided what I think would be most supportive for listeners to focus on after kind of going through a bunch of your work would be UPFs. This came up with a couple clients recently, and I just think
Mm.
here in the US with like RFK Jr. and people kind of freaking out about food and or processed food, quote unquote, this could be really timely. So. You wrote an excellent series on UPFs, and I think it'd be helpful to start by covering what even are UPFs?
Yeah, I mean, I have written so much about ultra processed foods at this point that I am kind of sick of talking about
Yes.
ultra processed foods in one sense. I'm happy to go through it here, but like I just am sick of hearing about
Yeah.
ultra processed foods because I think so much of the conversations are not actually about nutrition and health and more to do with ideology. So maybe we can unpack that a little bit. But yeah, let's like the breakdown is that well, there is no real consensus on what an ultra processed food is. There are a few different frameworks that have been proposed, and the most commonly used in the academic literature, and I think what is sort of being incorporated more into our sort of lay understanding of an ultra processed food is what's called the NOVA classification. NOVA classification. I don't know how they came up with this name. It doesn't stand for anything. I don't know why that annoys me so much, but it's not an acronym. It's just NOVA. And it was developed by this guy, Carlos Monteiro, who is a Brazilian academic. And he has had this, he first published a paper in 2009 about the concept of ultra processed foods. So it's been around a long time. And he basically noticed that in Brazilian communities where there was more industrialized food available, that there were worse health outcomes. So this is not exactly like a groundbreaking, revolutionary
Yeah.
finding. But one thing that was sort of interesting was he found that homes that had, I think this was Carlos Monteiro, but you might want to fact check me on this. There was some piece of research anyway that found that homes that had salt and sugar on the table had overall better diet quality. And as a nutritionist or dietitian, you're trained to think, oh, salt, sugar, bad, right? But
Mhm.
actually, what the researchers found was that this was an indication that people were cooking more, right? That they were cooking foods from scratch rather than buying pre-prepared or manufactured foods. So Carlos Monteiro has developed this theory that basically the amount and degree and level of processing sort of explains our relationship between food and health.
Mhm.
Okay, so in a more conventional, probably the approach to nutrition that you were taught and that I was taught is that when we look at we can sort of look at food through the lens of nutrients, right? Like we know that diets high in saturated fat and salt can lead to poor health outcomes, whereas diets higher in fruits and vegetables and whole grains lead to better health outcomes. So that's the way that I was taught nutrition and most people were taught nutrition. And but what Carlos Monteiro was proposing is this idea that actually it has more to do with not just the nutrients themselves, but the degree of processing. So he developed this framework called NOVA that has sort of four tiers of processing. So the first one is called the first tier, group one foods are unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So these are foods that are essentially in their kind of like raw state, right? You pull a carrot out of the ground, you pull an apple off of a tree. Those are unprocessed foods. Milk and meat and eggs and all the stuff that Maha want you to eat, basically. Those are considered unprocessed or minimally processed foods. So you might have, and we'll come back to this in a second, but you might have like food that has been slightly processed in that it's like flour might have been milled, for example, from a
Right.
wheat plant. So those are our group one um, foods. And then you have group two, which are processed culinary ingredients. So these are derivatives of group one food. So you might have, for example, olive oil from olives, butter from milk,
Mm.
soy sauce from edamame beans. So these are things that we, yeah, use to season and flavor foods, or we might, they might have been slightly processed in order to preserve them, like soy sauce, right? Has lots of salt in it. It's to preserve it. Okay, so we've got group one, group two. You with me so far?
We're here, and you're doing an
Okay,
amazing, for someone who's sick of talking about it, you're crushing it.
thanks. So group three then, I like to almost think of as group one plus group two foods mashed together. Uh, these are called processed foods. And this is where I think it starts to kind of come unraveled a little bit because we talk about a lot of foods that are manufactured or pre-prepared. We call them processed foods, right? And that's oftentimes synonymous with like junk food,
Hmm.
what people would call junk food. But actually, processed foods could be anything that you've cooked at home is a processed food, right? When you've taken group one, like raw ingredients, group two, like culinary ingredients, you've put them together, you've made like a chili or like fajitas or, anything. You baked a cake, that's a processed food. You bought bread from the farmer's market, that's a processed food. You bought fancy cheese from a cheesemonger, that's a processed food. So there's this kind of disconnect, I think, between what we colloquially refer to as a processed food
Right.
versus the sort of scientific definition of a processed food. And then we have our group four foods, which are considered ultra processed foods. These are often predominantly group three foods, so processed foods, but they may have the addition of um, an ingredient that has been derived from a group one or two food, but that has sort of been processed to a point where it's sort of unrecognizable
Yeah,
as
like
that food.
emulsifier, stabilizer, like those types of things.
Well, yes and no. So the addition of food additives does not in and of itself make a food ultra processed.
Mm.
Again, this is where like, the definition is really, really technical. It's sometimes difficult for me to even
Right. But I think this is a
parse
good point
what
because it's like, where is the line? And like, it kind of starts to
where's the
show
line.
the silliness of it.
Yeah, 1,000%. Um, but if you were to ask Carlos, he would tell you that, the purpose of the additive is really what determines whether or not it's an ultra processed food. So, sorry, I'm having many, many thoughts here. There's so much here to talk about, which is why I wrote like 12,000 words just in
Yeah.
one series of about ultra processed foods. But um the purpose if the purpose of the additive is to mask unpalatable flavors, if it is to change the color, if it is, if it has like this cosmetic purpose, that is what makes it an ultra processed food. But that's not the only thing, because it also has to be marketed in some way. Um, and it has to, there's this other sort of school of thought that like if you buy meat at the supermarket that is, wrapped in like cellophane and one of those like styrofoam
Right.
packs, whatever. What are they called? I don't know. Those
Yeah.
trays,
Totally.
then then that is an ultra processed food because of the packaging that it comes in.
Right.
So there are all these kinds of like, you know, there are all of these sort of qualifiers that mean that like almost everything we eat
Yeah.
is a process, like a highly processed or an ultra processed food. And so then, if we're saying that, okay, so here's an example. I think it can really help to go through each of the groups, because
Mhm.
people think of the groups as a hierarchy,
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And it was never intended to be a hierarchy. And I think in some ways, if we were to just use the Nova classification, all the kind of weird glitches notwithstanding, if we used it in the way that I think it was initially, the initial intention behind it is just a way to um, it's an epidemiological tool, right? Not something to use on an individual basis as a sort of personal diet project, right? But that's the way that it gets
Right.
used now. But if we use it just as in an epidemiological sense, it's fine, right? It's okay. It's not a hierarchy. It's just a way to classify
Yeah.
foods.
There's objectively different types of food. Like, yeah.
Totally, yeah. Now, I would argue that the Nova classification does not have enough granularity to give us the information that oftentimes, or to answer the questions that we're often asking of it. That's maybe a slightly separate issue. But anyway, let's go back to this, to group one, group two, group three, group four with an example. So let's use apples, first of all. So group one, you've got an apple, you pick it off the tree, you bite it, group one food, unambiguously. A group two food might be like apple cider vinegar,
Hmm.
right? And then a group three food, so your processed foods, it could be like an apple pie.
Hmm.
Then a group four food, using apple as an example, might be like an apple flavored Skittle, right?
Hmm.
I don't even know if you get apple flavored Skittles, but
Yeah.
let's just,
Like candy. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Like a Jolly Rancher, whatever. Um, so that's fairly unambiguous, right? Like
Right.
clear cut. Let's use corn as an example. So group one food, sweet corn, straight, biting it straight off the cob. I can't really think of a group two food for corn,
Corn
but like
syrup.
that I think would qualify as ultra processed because
Mm.
it has been through an additional level of refinement. But you
Yeah.
could say like cornstarch, for
Yeah.
example,
Cornstarch. Yeah. Okay.
would probably, that would work. Um, or like cornmeal, right? Like
Cornmeal. Yeah.
polenta, maybe. That could be group one. Even I don't know.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like,
But I
I
think
don't
that's good
know.
to
This
like
is the
show
best
people that it's
guess.
confusing. Yeah.
Group three, like corn tortillas, a processed food. And then group four, I would say high fructose corn syrup would be the obvious example there.
Yeah. But I also think about all the foods, like so many foods are made with corn, like the Cheetos and Doritos, like those are right, that's corn.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think they would all be considered ultra processed foods
Mhm.
without having like the ingredients in front of me. But this is the point that I'm trying to make, right? My 5-year-old, I buy him these packs of like popcorn, like snacking popcorn. The ingredients are corn, obviously, salt, and oil, right? Three ingredients that would all be considered, if we just looked at it from the perspective of the ingredients, that would be considered just a processed food, right? Group three, green light, go ahead, do what you want. But it's in a package that's made of plastic.
Mm,
It is advertised because of course, it's a manufactured food product, and the purpose of any manufactured food product is to make a profit.
right.
So there's marketing money going into that to persuade me to buy it or my 5-year-old to eat it, right? So where do we draw the line? Because
Yeah.
from a nutrition perspective, I'm like, yeah, it's a high fiber snack. It's allergy compliant, so I can send it into school.
Right.
There are it's convenient. I'm not going to be popping fucking I'm not
Yeah.
sure if I'm allowed to swear, but
Oh
it's
yeah,
too
of
late.
course. Yeah.
I'm not going to be popping like stovetop popcorn and like sending it in a little lunchbox for him to go to school, right? I have shit to do.
Mhm.
So is it, a high fiber nutritious snack, or is it a plastic packaged nightmare? I don't know. As a parent, what am I supposed to do?
Yeah.
Obviously, I'm speaking
You-
hypothetically. I'm going to give him the packaged
Yeah.
popcorn. But from a parent's perspective, you can get so bogged down in the minutia of detail here that you just completely miss the wood for the trees, right?
Yes.
Um, so, there are other inconsistencies, I suppose, with Nova. Like, for example, and again, I don't have any issue with this, but here's another place that I think it could be confusing for people is that under the Nova classification system, refined carbohydrates like white bread, white pasta, white rice, white potatoes, all the things we've been telling people for eons are bad for them.
Mm.
I mean, again, I don't subscribe to this logic, but I'm
Right.
just trying to highlight the kind of the tensions in this framework. They are considered a group one food. Okay. And then conversely, you could make, cookies, cake, anything that is high in fat, salt, sugar, and refined carbohydrates at home, but it would, because it's not an ultra processed food, then, again, it's that sense of like, well, then it's good for you. And again, I don't subscribe to this
Right.
like dichotomy of foods as being good or bad. I'm just trying to point out some of these inconsistencies and some of the places that I think this can get really confusing for people.
Totally. I'm like completely like chomping at the bit here to get into the next piece, which is first of all, thank you for taking us through that. And I actually appreciate hearing how confusing it is because again, I really kind of think that's the point of like this can start to feel arbitrary or silly like when you're like so in
Yeah.
the weeds. And I'm just so struck by the element of elitism of like, well, if you make the cake at home and like you have the time and the money to do that, but like that, you're in this like higher
Yeah.
standing, but God forbid you get the cake at a grocery store and it's in a package and whatever, then what does that mean about you? And
Hmm.
I want to talk more about this piece. So I think the question that most gets at this here is like the the evidence linking UPFs to poor health outcomes is mostly associational. I'm like, well, stumbling on that word.
It's
Is
observational. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So we're looking at population
correlation.
level. Yeah.
Yeah. Can you break down why that matters in terms of like what? could be missing, like social determinants, and what else could be going on in places where people on a population level are leaning more on quote unquote like ultra processed foods.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just to go back to sort of one, just to pick up on one thing that you said there about, it being the whole conversation about ultra processed foods, being elitist. I completely agree. It's so wrapped up in ideology. And, you know, there's a big conversation in the UK at the moment about taxing ultra processed foods, about putting warning labels on them. Um, and the thing that I keep going back to is like, okay, well, that's all very well and good, but how do you expect people to feed themselves?
Yeah,
Because, and then people will be like, oh, we'll use the taxes to make fruits and vegetables cheaper. But that doesn't answer the question. Because how do you expect people to feed themselves everything from scratch when you're not providing the infrastructure and the material conditions that they need to do that? Now,
hmm
what I mean is, I'm drawing here on this concept called food work, which was developed by Priya Fielding Sine and her colleagues. She's a sociologist, and sociologists have come up with this framework called food work, which speaks to, I think, the missing link between um, our, knowledge and education about nutrition and actual health outcomes. Because so often this piece of like, who is doing the shopping, who is doing the meal planning, who is doing the meal preparation, who is doing the actual cooking and cleaning and budgeting and like auditing the cupboards and the freezer and like clearing out all the, gunky leftovers at the bottom of the fridge. Somebody has to do that work. And just because you've made vegetables cheaper, that doesn't get the work done,
right,
right? So what are we doing meaningfully on a policy level to help make food work less laborious, right? Less because, you know, I'm working 8-hour days and then picking my kid up from school and then having to prepare his dinner, sort out a snack for school the next day, a bedtime snack on top of like homework and laundry and all of the other stuff, right? Everything that, again, sociologists would call the second shift, right? And you want me to, what, like make everything from
yeah,
scratch,
like trad wife it up in the house and like
trad wife it up.
yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's crazy. And I think about I'm just so it's so like clear to me how this causes problems. Like people who fall into the trap of you need to eat everything from scratch and have like ingredient households. Well, then when you get hungry, you're gonna start eating weird stuff. Like I have clients who are like, I'm eating like scoops of peanut butter and chocolate chips because I'm hungry and nothing is able to be eaten immediately. I have raw sweet potatoes and like
Yeah.
grains. Like that's not gonna be ready.
Yeah.
And then that
Yeah.
I'm even thinking about like how that can lead to like binging because you're not
Totally.
your food isn't available in like a timely manner because your choices are trad wife it up or nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think we have to have a really serious conversation if we want to improve the quality of people's diets and we want them to have access to high quality, nourishing food. The answer is not to smack labels on the on packaged food. It's not to shame and stigmatize people. It's, social policies like universal basic income, communized, access to food. I mean, I won't like go too far down that rabbit hole because it's a whole thing in and of itself, but it's just to say that we're creating, you know, when I say that UPFs are being used as an ideological tool, it is exactly that, and it fits in with the political moment that we're in, Maha, the swing to the right in terms of politics, whereby what we're saying tacitly when we're saying we want people to cook more from scratch is we want women back in the kitchen.
So
How
true.
dare you leave the kitchen?
So
You
true.
left and look what's happened. Your kids are getting sick. People are fat, blah, 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 blah. So get back in the kitchen. Um, and this. ideology really runs through a lot of the content that I'm seeing online. I wrote recently this piece about body fascism because the ideas that we're seeing around food are mirroring this political moment that we're in ways that are really troubling around like regressive ideas around gender roles, regressive ideas around immigration, and like this resurgence of patriarchal male domination. It's always been there. Of course, all of these things have always been there, but it seems like so much more blatant and in your face now. So I'll get down off of my soapbox
No,
and
thank
answer
you
the
so
actual
much.
question that you're
No,
asking.
I really appreciate you sharing that, and specifically like my jaw drop when just the realization of like this isn't about the ingredients people are eating or how processed their food is. It's about the mirroring the political moment, and basically if women have to cook or if someone has to cook everything from scratch, and let's call it what
It's
it
going
is,
to be
it's usually
women.
women,
Yeah.
then they're spending more
And
time.
minoritized women as well. So if you've got a middle class woman who can outsource food
Right,
work to nannies, to childminders, to daycare, to like all these other people. And then that's coming at the expense of those women being able to do food work for their family, which then
right.
has a knock-on effect on their family's health. Um, so yeah, it has this ripple effect.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about I'm no longer on social media, but I'm thinking about the role of like almost like fetishizing trad wife content, and then like I yeah, I think some women are like, "Oh, how dreamy." Like, "Oh, I'm gonna make Cheez-Its from scratch for my kid or whatever." Like Nara Smith and stuff. And then people don't think that like deeply and critically about it. It's just like, "Oh, like that sounds like it's like becomes a thing where it's like your hobby and your personality, which great if you like cooking from scratch, great. But like if you feel like you have to be a good person or a good mom, and then
Yeah.
you have no choice and other ways to spend your time, like that's a whole other story.
I mean, that the Nara Smith of it all is very, I don't know, it's very interesting. I think that she reveals something about the absurdity of the whole like trad wife movement. But I think there is something really dangerous there about, even if we are not literally, like leaving our jobs and going back into the house, into the kitchen, what's happening psychologically, right? If we, so much of um our energy and our
Like
what's the word that I'm
bandwidth.
looking for? Yeah, our bandwidth is taken up by worrying about, is this an ultra processed food or which Nova group does this belong to? Like it's taking us away from like meaningful political engagement
Totally.
in the same way that like preoccupation with thinness
Right. That whole quote,
does the same thing.
like the beauty myth
Yeah.
quote, like a quietly mad, you know, what is it? Dieting is the most potent political sedative
Yeah.
in history.
Yeah.
A quietly
Yeah.
mad population is a tractable one. That one. Yeah.
Yeah. Before Naomi Wolf went totally
Yes,
off the
yes.
rails.
Still a good quote. Um, I want to bring this up to you. I haven't said this to anyone, but I've been thinking about this. Like, I personally feel like there's something else going on with like the allure of like cooking from scratch and like trad wife, all that.
Mhm.
Um, I feel like everything is so automatic now that like people are almost craving a little more friction. Like, like,
Yeah,
like,
the friction maxing,
yeah,
like,
friction, yeah. But like. The whole I feel like there's like a movement to go like more like analog and not just in cooking. Like, girls are like, I use people are getting flip phones. People are getting flip phones. Like, have you heard about
mm.
this?
Yeah, my friend got one, or like the brick thing that you put in the fridge, and then you have to like it like turns off half of your apps, so you can only use like Google
Right.
Maps.
Yeah. So like I just wonder if part of it is like we want to feel something again. Like what is it like to make banana bread? Like that whole COVID, everyone's making banana bread or sourdough. Like,
Yeah.
and I don't know, that feels a little like less charged than like the more like and it's all wrapped together. I don't think you can just like pull
Mm.
one piece out, but Yeah, what do you think about this idea that like maybe part of the move away from quote unquote UPFs is like pushing on
Mhm.
something in people where they're like, I want to know what it's like to cook something from scratch because like I maybe never have.
Yeah. Look, I think it's complicated because, um I like to grow things in the garden and like get my hands dirty in the earth, and that's really grounding for me. I have a lot of friends who really love to cook and spend time, with ingredients and like understanding the provenance of food and, like would consider themselves foodies. And I think that that is, if that's your jam,
Yeah,
that's really cool. I sort of hesitate to sort of, I guess, say that that's a value that everyone should hold.
100%.
And
Yeah,
yeah, and that like it's also just a deeply middle class, like white lady kind
totally.
of vibe. So I think there is probably something to, those hobbies or practices or whatever you want to call them that feel really grounding and feel really like they can sort of act as a counterbalance to, again, this like crazy political moment that we're in. And I don't think that that like fully explains it. Like there's a
Totally.
sort of sentiment, especially in the sort of anti-diet space, that like, okay, it's easier to focus on food when the world is out of control.
Right. We see
So
control.
you control food, and that, I think that that does go some way to explain this phenomenon. But again, I come back to this idea, and I wrote about it in this essay that it basically I'm making the argument, no, it's not diet culture, it's body fascism. And
Mhm.
we have to look and think more critically and look more deeply at the patterns that are kind of, um, that we're seeing around food, like GLP-1 use, it's GLP-1 use, the kind of war on ultra processed foods,
Right.
and this sort of like moralizing around food. But we're also seeing like increasingly intensified beauty ideals in terms of there's a lot more rampant misogyny and ageism playing out in,
Yeah.
discourse around bodies in a way that we haven't seen for a long time. Um, and yeah, I think that this is part of this broader uh, project of like re-domesticating women and disciplining their bodies, but not just women, because all of these beauty ideals are wrapped up in Eurocentric, um, white beauty ideals as
Right.
well. So there's, again, thinking about like Sabrina Strings's work on Fearing the Black Body, and how this is all intended to distance us from um the figure of the black body.
Right.
So I feel like I've gone on a total like
No, there's I
roundabout tangent there, but
yeah. Like what I'm
hopefully
hearing
some
and
of
what you
that is
just
making
said
sense.
is like maybe if people were just more interested in cooking from scratch again, like in a vacuum, and that was that, like maybe that would explain, like,
Hmm.
oh, people want a little more friction, but we can't ignore that this is also happening while so many, like in the current political climate, like the beauty standards, the GLP-1s, it's like you said, re-domesticating women. It's you can't like just like pull that one piece out and ignore the
Well,
rest.
and it's also a privilege, right? To be able to be like, you know what, this is too much. I'm checking out. And that's different from saying like we need to restore and kind of like shore up
Right.
for, challenging fascism. Um, and that's not to say that you need to like burn yourself out to be, politically engaged. But I think it is, to just be like, well, I'm gonna go like make some sourdough banana bread. It's like, okay, but what
Yeah.
about this dumpster fire over here that's
Right.
going on?
Yeah, I really appreciate this massive zoom out and like kind of synthesizing of everything that's going on. I think that the conversation would be incomplete without addressing like, the studies that, as I said, like the studies
Oh yeah,
that
the
link.
associate, the thing that you asked me about.
No, but I loved where we just went. So coming back to for people who are like, yeah, but the studies say that
Mhm.
UPFs link to poorer health outcomes. And again, we talked about correlation, not causal. The studies don't show it's impossible to keep people in a lab and control everything, but
Mhm.
just have the one variable be they're eating UPFs. So can we talk about like what else could explain negative health outcomes in populations that are maybe having higher amounts of UPFs?
Yeah, well, I think, and this is kind of like the raging debate that is going on, I think, in from the outside, the kind of the conversation on UPFs looks like it's really settled and like we're like, yeah, UPF's bad, everything else good.
Mhm.
But there's nuance there even within like the category of ultra processed foods. Like you can have everything ranging from, like Haribo all the way through to like hummus and like whole wheat bread could all be lumped in with ultra processed food depending on the kind of the category like the specific ingredients. There are there are a couple of things that are coming up for me, sorry. So first of all, there was a really interesting study that came out of Harvard in 2024 that tried to kind of look at ultra processed foods in a bit more granular detail and figure out, okay, is it universally across the board that eating more ultra processed foods is linked with a higher risk of, different diseases or of early death? And they found that no, it's not across the board that this association exists, and it is an association, which is an important thing to remember. But they were able to kind of like tease out which ultra processed foods have seem to have the biggest detrimental effect. And surprise, surprise, it was sugar sweetened beverages, so Coke and 7 Up and Pepsi and whatever, Dr. Pepper. And it was sugar sweetened breakfast cereals, and it was processed meat. So, like cured meats, salami and
Bacon, yeah.
bacon and that kind of thing. This is all stuff we already know, right? This is like nutrition 101. They also found that there was no effect of things like unsweetened breakfast cereals and like the whole wheat bread and savory snacks and, an increase in all-cause mortality. So what this sort of highlights to me is that, or what it kind of confirms is that this category of ultra processed food doesn't really lend anything new to what we already know, to that really traditional understanding of nutrition that I talked about at the very beginning, right?
Mhm.
That we know that foods that are higher in sugar, higher in salt, higher in fat are more likely at the population level. I'm not again saying that these are good foods or bad foods, but at the population level are more likely to lead to worse outcomes. So then the question becomes, okay, well, why are people eating more of those foods more of the time? And obviously the explanation that a lot of people sort of default to is that they're heavily marketed, that they're addictive, that they're, convenient and cheap, right? Those are the kinds of explanations that people often give. And we could go down a whole rabbit hole sort of explaining why the idea of food addiction is
Yeah, I got a
wrong.
podcast episode on that. I'll link to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that is it's not that.
Yeah.
Um, okay, yes, these foods are aggressively marketed and they are highly palatable. Don't like that term. But again, that feels like a really unsatisfactory explanation to me because, again, it comes back to what we were talking about before. What is the alternative? right?
Hmm.
The alternative is that we all spend a long time preparing foods from scratch, right? This concept of food work. And the reality is that people that who are highly dependent on ultra processed foods are the same people that do not have the time, the energy, the money, or other resources to be cooking everything from scratch.
Right.
So that might be because they are disabled. It might be because they are elderly. It might be because they're depressed. It might be because they are um, just, busy, stressed
Yeah.
parents. There's a whole host of reasons why that might be. But more often than not, it's because people are poor.
Hmm.
It's because people are facing other sources of stress and stigma and oppression in their lives. Um, and so, yeah, what I'm in a long-winded way here is saying is that the vast majority of these studies, they will look at sort of um, markers of economic deprivation, but they're not necessarily able to capture that to its fullest extent, if that makes
Right.
sense.
Yeah.
Um, and so yeah, that kind of relationship ends up the relationship between like our capacity to do food work and social deprivation just gets swept under the carpet. Did
Yeah.
I
You
explain your
no, you did. You did. I'm just thinking of like I kind of just want to say it back and
Mm,
like on a really broad level, I just think about how, okay, epidemiological study links high sugar, high salt, processed or ultra processed foods
mhm.
to quote unquote negative health outcomes.
Yeah.
And, people see that and they're like, yes, see, this is why. But
Mhm.
it sounds like what you're saying, and what we've talked a lot about in this world on this podcast is like, yeah, but what else might be the case for someone who has to consume more processed or ultra processed foods? Like you're saying, maybe they have face other or marginalized in other ways, or don't have good access to healthcare, or lower socioeconomic status, or don't live in a safe neighborhood where they feel they could go get fresh air and walk on the streets, or um, any number of things that those social determinants in and of themselves could explain the negative health outcomes. Whereas
Mhm.
like someone who doesn't have those and eats ultra processed foods might not have the same negative health outcomes. And it's hard because we can't just measure the amount of ultra processed food someone a population's eating without also like the reasons that are inextricably part of why
Yeah.
they might have to resort to more convenience foods.
Yeah, 100%. There's also a whole bunch of what we would call measurement errors with these kinds of studies, in that oftentimes we are going back retrospectively into data sets and trying to retroactively fit this NOVA classification to food, like food frequency questionnaires or food diaries or whatever data set that we have. And so oftentimes it's his best guess. Like, is this an ultra processed food? We don't know because these data were collected before we even had the tools to assess what an ultra processed food. And those tools are being developed and being validated now more than they were, but still a lot of the evidence that we have are based on like old data sets and old, methodologies. So they're and um, for any nutrition nerds who are interested in digging into that a little bit more deeply, there are a couple of critical papers on ultra processed foods that yeah go into the ins and outs of the epidemiology. So I'd be happy to share that with you.
Awesome. We'll link those. I think I think I'm going to ask you the two questions I ask everyone, which are not about ultra processed foods. So you can exhale that we're done.
I could talk
Um,
about it all day, but yes, let's
yeah.
talk about something else.
The two questions I ask everyone who comes on the show. The first is, what is your current biggest diet culture pet peeve?
Mm, oh my God.
It's hard to pick just
I
one.
think, yeah, but I mean, I think it has to be the sort of glamorization of GLP-1s. There's just a report that came out this week um, highlighting the link between GLP-1s and eating disorders. Like we didn't see that coming, but it's good to in one way it's good to see it being recognized and taken seriously. And at the same time, it's so upsetting and depressing the way that they are just being um, handed out like candy. So yeah, that would be my thing at the moment.
100%. Getting a lot of that answer from the last few guests. And the second question I love to ask is, in learning about intuitive eating, I got really interested in the word intuition. I think it's such
Mm.
a loaded word and
Yeah, yeah.
so personal. And
Mm.
so I love to ask, what does intuition mean to you and how do you experience it?
Oh my gosh, that's a great question. I also I don't know because I would have said maybe like years ago I would have probably given an answer like it's just like, like your gut instinct and what feels right. And but I like my the older I get, the more I'm like, can I actually trust my intuition? Is this leading me to the right, like to good places? I'm not so sure. So I would say that like, yeah, that feels like a complicated question and I don't have a great answer, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's okay. I appreciate the answer of, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I didn't send it to you before, so you didn't have time to
I was
think
like,
it
oh
up.
yeah, that's a surprise. It's a curveball.
Yeah. Well, Laura, thank you so much. You've given me so much to think about, and I know the listeners also. I am really grateful for this conversation. Where can people find you to stay connected and learn more about your work?
Yeah, the best place to like connect is on my newsletter, which is canihaveanothersnack.com, not on Substack. It's its own freestanding newsletter. So I'm posting there multiple times a week, and there's like a discussion thread that we have every week and a forum to just like get support and ask questions and connect with others. And sometimes I'm posting on Instagram at Laura Thomas PhD. And then yeah, my books are Just Eat It and How to Just Eat It, which is more of a workbook to kind of guide you through the principles of intuitive eating and give you some additional tools around body compassion and grounding techniques, things like that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Laura.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.